Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Calls Me Home by TricksterThief. Luffy and Zoro hit an island before they reach Orange Town, where they find another person for their crew. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry when Luffy came flying from the sky, screaming, "I'll never let you have my gunner!" Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Existing as far as I know, I am the only one left of our family that remembers the primal process, or at least was told of it, and so I will be the one to leave a record of it for our descendants. This will be my last journal, and I wish whoever finds this the best of luck. Danny stared down at the journal in her hands, not sure what to make of it exactly. The journals dated all the way back to the end of the Void Century, detailing the disappearance of the Ferris family, or, as they had been known before, the Ferox family. It never explained why or how they disappeared, but it was implied heavily that no one should find out that the family still existed, especially the government. She had looked to see if there were any journals before the Void Century, and there was, but they were old and falling apart, the script ancient and faded. She hadn't been able to read them at all. Her mother's family, was of the sort she had never seen before. They were users of the primal side of humans, more animal than human, and were great warriors. She was shocked to find that all of the women of the family had been sick, but because of the primal process, that sickness disappeared from their bodies like it never existed, making their bodies stronger than ever. There were dangers to the process though. Only 2 out of every 5 made it through. The rest died. The journal described how their doctors had tried to use the aspect of the process that rid the body of the disease to create a cure, but they had all ended in failure, and the head of the family had put an end to any more experimentations lest a massacre occur. However, they did discover something about the process that led to less deaths of the process. The disease didn't affect animals. It was discovered that most of those who had died during the process hadn't awakened their primal side, which made them more animal than human. It then became a requirement that whoever wished to go through the process had to wake their primal side. The deaths decreased, but they still occurred because of the battles fought. Danny nearly laughed as she read through the process. She hadn't originally been willing to try something that had been the cause of so many deaths in her ancestors, but reading through it, she'd already done half of the process without even realizing it. She'd woken her primal side up and she'd defeated the top predator in Predator Island. She'd become more animal than human, and that was why she hadn't had an attack in months. It wasn't fully gone. It wouldn't be until she ate the plant in the book. The plant was called Ater corpora sanguis, and it was poisonous to humans, unless of course you'd woken your primal side up. It was a plant that carnivores would eat as it tasted like blood and filled the stomach. It wasn't nutritious by any means, and if you ate too much of it you'd easily become addicted to it, but it was also an antitoxin. Danny had never held the hope of a cure ever existing, and knew that she would die before she could even truly live, but if this worked, she wouldn't have to worry about being a liability to the crew, or leaving them too soon. She would be able to stay with them to the end. It wasn't even an option to not do the process anymore. If she died, Danny frowned. She couldn't leave her crew with nothing, leaving them to wonder what had happened to her or if she had abandoned them. No, she couldn't do that. She looked around the room and found a small journal sitting on the desk. She picked it up, opening it, and found it empty. She stared at it thoughtfully and tucked it into her bag before pulling out a small stack of papers and a pen. Sitting back down on the floor, she began to write letters to each of her crew members. She'd give them to JoJo and tell her to hold onto them until the end of the year, and if she doesn't come back, send them to Saibodi. She'd give the bartender the vivre card she had for Rayleigh, and she could use that to send them. She wouldn't leave her crew with nothing if she didn't make it. Left Danny, left Koopa, letters and vivre card left with JoJo, and a log pose for the island in her bag. It would take 2 weeks to reach Predator Island again. The pirate was sitting at the head of the boat, body relaxed and eyes closed. She inhaled deeply and spread her senses out. Her dad had been surprised at the fact that she could feel her crew's emotions and even blend them with her own, but Shanks had said it was a rare aspect of Kenbunshoku haki. Ben had taken it in stride and had pretty much beat the other, more common, aspect of the hockey into her head. But she wasn't using that one at the moment. She wanted to check up on her crew and have her primal side get acclimated to them. She hadn't tried to use her hockey while she was in her primal state before, so she wasn't sure how this was going to work. Danny relaxed fully, her breathing evening out, and she simply felt. She felt Usopp first. The beast inside of her growled warningly and she growled back, sending her feelings for the teen at the creature. It examined them closely before settling down with a few chuffs. The sharpshooter had become cub to the beast and would be protected fiercely when the need arose. The small knot in her stomach eased and she focused back on the teen. His emotions flowed into her and she smiled, knowing he was well and good. Chopper was next and she had to fight with her beast to make it back down about the poor reindeer being prey. Eventually, she managed to make it see the doctor as a cub rather than prey, and she groaned, wondering if it was going to be like this every time she found one of her crewmates. Danny reached for Chopper's emotions and frowned when she felt a continuous frustration and worry directed at her. The pirate's frown deepened and wished she could do something to ease the doctor's worry about her. The poor thing probably thought she was close to death's door. The longer time went by and he couldn't find anything to help her, and couldn't send any medicine to her because he didn't know where she was. Her beast growled in displeasure, pacing in agitation. It didn't like not being able to help the cub any more than she did. Frankie was next, and her beast immediately took her feelings for the cyborg and marked him as the sentinel of the pack. She supposed that made sense. He was shipwright and had even created Sunny, so him being the person that patrolled the territory and ensure the pack was safe on said territory made perfect sense. She huffed out a short laugh and focused on Frankie's feelings, smiling when she felt his joy and excitement at discovering something new. Sanji followed and she was a bit startled when his emotions hit her before her beast could evaluate the cook. Just sheer desperation, disgust and fear were prevalent, but there was also the sense of pure determination and urgency. Where the hell had Sanji ended up at? Her beast rumbled in agreement, but marked the man as the hunter. He was the one that provided food and kept them fed and their food supplies up to par. Brook pushed his way in, emotions elated and jubilant, though there was still that constant thrum of loneliness that tended to cling to him like a stubborn burr. Her beast chuffed and chewed toy was its answer. Even with her feelings for the skeleton taken in, she couldn't stop the bubble of laughter, as the emotions of her beast curled through her. It told her that chewed toy was one to be protected at all costs, because another would not be able to be found readily. She decided to leave it at that and didn't bother trying to get her beast to change its mind. Nami came in from above, startling her a bit, and her beast immediately dubbed her as cub and caretaker. The orange-haired woman was still a cub to the beast as her reactions were similar to Usopp, but she was also the one that kept the others from aggravating their wounds, or keep them, mostly, out of danger. Nami was currently feeling mischievous, but there was a constant thread of worry for the rest of her crew, especially Luffy. Robin was next, a fair distance S. Nami was different, being in the sky, and her beast growled agitatedly but calmed as Danny's emotions for the woman bled through. Robin became the elder and scout of the pack, and she agreed with that wholeheartedly. The older woman had been on many pirate crews, though unsavory ones, and being an archaeologist, she knew a lot and didn't mind sharing her knowledge. It was also because of this knowledge that she was considered the scout, because she tended to know a lot about the islands they hit, providing valuable information for the crew. Robin was currently entertained greatly by someone's actions, but Danny could tell that the woman's thoughts and feelings never strayed too far from their crew. It sent a warm feeling through her at that, because the older woman had been through so much that it was nice to know that she considered them all crew and family. Zoro shoved his way into her senses, his determination shouldering his way to the forefront and threatening to take her over. Her beast let out a loud, rumbling purr and Danny flushed when it dubbed the swordsman as potential mate in beta. She snarled at it, but it wouldn't budge and she groaned. Great, she seriously hoped that wouldn't become a problem, or else she was going to have issues. She ignored it for now, determined to only think of the younger man as a beta. He was not a potential mate, damn it. Luffy was the last one and her beast reared, letting out a deep, growling roar, fur fluffing up and ears lying flat on its head. Its lips were pulled back and revealed its wicked fangs. And Danny hit back with her own snarling roar, pushing back at it viciously. Luffy wasn't a threat. She forced her emotions for her captain at the agitated and enraged creature, shoving even harder when it resisted. A whisper in her mind was whimpering over and over again. Alpha, 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 alpha. He is alpha, Danny snarled at her beast, finally managing to push her emotions into the reluctant creature, who didn't want an alpha. The beast let out a low, deep moan, voicing its distress, but allowed for it happen, sheathing and unsheathing its great claws. Slowly, it calmed, Luffy's emotions washing over them. The determination and need for his nakama giving them a sense of calm. Slowly, Danny blinked, gold eyes open, and she was startled when the night sky met her. She frowned and muttered to herself, I didn't think that much time had passed. I'll have to work on that. XXX. A slow, rather boring week rolled by where Danny perfected her haki towards her crew. She was now constantly aware of the emotional state her crewmates were in, and she was now working on becoming even more in sync with her beast. It had been a shock to find her canines longer and sharper after 2 days of constant aching, but she got over it rather quickly. It wasn't the weirdest thing she'd seen. Miss Easter came to mind here. Danny was flat on her back on the deck of her ship, eyes closed and breathing even and slow. The water sloshed as a larger ship approached her smaller one, a black flag fluttering in the wind. A skull and crossbone was marked in dark red on the sails. Danny was startled out of her meditative state by a hand touching her shoulder, and before the person could react, she had him pinned to the deck and one of her revolvers pointed at his forehead. Gold eyes glared down at him, teeth bared dangerously, and the man let out a whimper, not even trying to struggle. The air around the woman who had seemed to be defenseless and sleeping was feral and pressed down against him. Who are you and what are you doing on my ship? She snarled, voice a mixture of animal and human. The pirate only garbled, foaming at the mouth as his eyes rolled back in a dead faint. She scoffed, standing fluidly and picking up the man effortlessly and tossing him off the side of her boat. The splash alerted the man's crew that something was wrong, and they all moved to the railing. Before they could reach it, a shadowed figure, the sun coming from behind them, appeared crouched on the railing, gold eyes glaring at them dangerously. The figure's bloodlust was palpable in the air, tinged with feral intensity, and the pirates felt shivers crawl down their spines. I seem to be bored, the figure purred, slowly standing up from her crouch and balancing easily on the beam. Care to fix that for me? Danny stared down at the crew of pirates in front of her and felt excitement bubble up inside of her. She hadn't had a real fight since before Saibodi, and she was itching to try out what she had learned from General. One of the men let out a yell and charged at her, drawing a sword in a quick flash. She leapt over the blade and kicked the man's face with both feet and used it as a springboard to flip over onto the deck. She landed in the middle of the group, crouched low and swept her leg out and around, sending 2 men to the floor in a tangled mess of arms and legs. She stood fluidly, blocking a punch with her forearm and using her other arm to swing her flintlock rifle off her back, gripping the neck and swinging it at the pirate trying to sneak up behind her. The butt of the rifle slammed into the guy's face and she ducked under the other fist the guy sent her way, swinging her rifle forward and nailing him in the stomach. She kicked his legs out from under him as he doubled over, sending him flipping back and smashing into 2 other men rushing at her. The group flew back and she spun her rifle around her arm and back, gripping it with her other hand as she pulled out her revolver and shot at a man trying to shoot her from the upper deck. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, and she shot again, hitting him in the leg next. He fell to the deck with pained cry, falling over the railing and smashing into the lower deck in a crumbled heap. She spun around, leaping over a sweeping kick at the same time, and slammed into the man's knee, a sickening crack splitting the air. Arms snaked around her waist, and a voice snarled in her ear, "If you don't stop beating up my men, I'll be doing some rather unsavory things to that pretty little body of yours, Missy." Danny's eyes flashed, and she bared her teeth in a furious snarl. She snapped her head back, slamming it into the captain's nose at the same time she stomped back on his foot. The arms let go of her in shock and she spun around, hair whipping out around her as she brought her knee up and smashed it into the man's groin. She ignored the pained groaning the man was doing and tightened her grip on her rifle and slammed it into the man's head, sending him flying across the deck. At the same time, however, one of the man's crew was charging at her and she grabbed her other rifle off her back, not being able to use the one heading for the captain. She spun the rifle once and smashed it straight into the man's side, his ribs cracking under the harsh blow and sending him sprawling to the ground. The female pirate licked her lips, fury simmering underneath her skin and sending her blood boiling. She flexed her hands around her rifles, something settling inside of her. Having a rifle in each hand just felt right. Lost in the sudden feeling, she missed the pirate rushing at her and earned herself a fist to the face. Her nose cracked, but went unbroken, and blood gushed forth as her head snapped back. She reacted instinctively, bringing both rifles up and slamming each on either side of the man's head. The hit to her face broke her anger, and she panted, licking her lips and tasting the blood that dripped from her nose. She brought her hand up, still clutching her rifle, and brushed under her nose, smearing blood all over her hand. She was coming down from her high, the pain bringing her back down to earth. Her eyes bled back to dark brown and her beast subsided with a low chuffing noise, satisfied with the fight. She stared around at the downed and cowering pirates around her and couldn't even scrounge up a little sympathy. She blinked at them languidly and said blandly, "Maybe next time, you should take care in choosing your targets." Better it didn't take her long to supposed to eat. She'd remembered seeing it before in the clearing where she'd killed the tiger, on the edge of the pond. It hadn't registered as odd, even with its much smaller size than the rest of the plants. It was a thin stalk-like plant, with large, broad leaves staggered on either side. It was a dark, dark green, almost black and blended easily at night at the dark pool's edge. Danny crouched down next to the plant, head cocked to the side. She'd rigged herself a place up in the trees and also nestled amongst the roots of one of the trees, sticking to the place where she'd slain the tiger. She made it her territory, her belongings hidden in the place among the roots, masking the scent with the leaves and bark of the tree. The boat she'd arrived in was anchored halfway up the beach, and she hadn't bothered hiding it. With gentle fingers she plucked the top leaf and part of the stem off the plant and carried it to her place under the roots. It was furnished with the remains of the tiger skin, its own scent masking hers, and she settled down onto it, staring down at the plant in her hands. Her bottom lip trembled and she took a shaky breath before with trembling hands she put it in her mouth and ate it. She swallowed, eyes bleeding gold, and the familiar taste of blood saturated her throat and tongue, pervading her senses. Her stomach felt full and she slowly stood, making her way out of the roots and heading for the pond for a drink of water. She stumbled as she got closer to the pond, falling to her knees at the edge, body trembling. She stared at her reflection, wondering why the image was so blurry and when had it gotten so hot. She made a jerky move for the pond with her hand, scooping up some of the water and drinking it clumsily. The cool water slid down her throat and her vision swayed, the world spinning around her as she lost her balance and fell on her side. Her body was racked with shivers and she curled up into a ball, moaning in pain as her teeth chattered. Her legs twitched and her stomach rolled violently. Danny somehow managed to push herself up again as her stomach heaved and everything she'd eaten earlier came out, splashing to the floor. She stared down at the mess uncomprehendingly, arms shaking under her weight. Blood and flecks of a brownish goop were mixed in the vomit and she gagged, her mind going fuzzy. Her stomach rolled again and she heaved, only blood and the brown goop coming up this time and burning her throat. Her body twitched as spasms of pain shot throughout her, making her limbs tremble even harder under her weight. Her thoughts were swirling and jumbled and she felt like she was being burned from the inside out. How was this supposed to make her better? She coughed wetly, blood splashing past her lips, still stained with that brown goop, and she felt tears spilling over as she sobbed, fingers digging in the damp earth underneath her. "Lou. FFY. She murmured, coughing as more of the brown gunk spilled past her lips, filling her mouth with a disgusting taste. Danny instinctively reached out for Luffy more fully, the rest of her crew blurring and disappearing from her senses. "Luffy. I'm sorry." More filth splashed to the ground and she sobbed roughly, her throat clogging up and snot dripping from her nose. Her stomach heaved again and her lungs constricted painfully as blood, gunk, and stomach fluids poured from her mouth. She was startled from her hazy mind when Luffy's emotions seemed to push themselves at her in a soothing, worried embrace. It swirled inside of her and she knew Luffy was smiling widely and laughing as he said, "It's gonna be all right, nay, Danny?" Danny smiled tremulously through her tears, the edges of her vision going dark, before she collapsed to the ground, avoiding her mess, and falling unconscious. Accuracy. Danny woke up to sound of a rough chirping like sound, and when she opened her eyes a furry face was staring back at her with amber eyes. She stared, confusion evident as she slowly pushed herself up off the ground and stared around at her surroundings. The large fox creature yipped, pushing its muzzle against her side and make a rough rumbling sound. "Ah," she muttered, nose twitched as the smell of her vomit and blood and whatever gunk she'd coughed up the day before reached her. She gagged silently and stood hastily, wobbling slightly but managing to keep herself upright. Her mouth felt like something had curled up and died in it, and she wasted no time in going to the pond for water. Once she'd managed to get the worst of it down, she patted the fox on the head gently, indicating she was all right, before heading for her place under the roots. The fox left, disappearing in the brush, and she ducked into her hole, heading straight for her bag. She wasn't surprised about how the animals had been acting around her, not after reading the journals. A side effect of waking up your primal side was that you became more animal than human, and the real animals reacted to that. Some would act like she was one of them, while others would see her as a threat and attack. Being on Predator Island, chances are she'd be seen as more of a threat than a friend, so she'd have plenty of creatures to hone her skills against. Not to mention the place was rife with plant life that she'd be able to experiment making powders with. Danny opened her bag and pulled out the empty journal she'd grabbed from the caves and a pen, before arming herself with her rifles and knives and pulling the tiger head over her own head and heading back out. She wanted to examine the plant life before she started battling with the animals on the island. It hadn't really sunk in yet that she was alive. XXX. Danny hissed as she pressed the poultice on the gashes on her side. She was kneeling next to the pond in her territory, eyes gold as she tended to the wound she'd gotten from a wolf she'd been fighting. The wolf had raked its claws from the side of her stomach, across her side and down part of her lower back, leaving behind 3 bloody gashes that were definitely going to scar, adding to her growing collection. Of course, she'd gotten back at the wolf and it would eventually sport a scar running from its forehead, across its eye and down its muzzle. She sighed as she wrapped the wound, holding the wounds closed and keeping the poultice from leaking down her hips and legs. She'd have to get clothes from Koopa before she headed to Sabody and a nice pair of fingerless gloves. She didn't want her crew to see the nasty scars all over her palms and the back of her hands. Some of the plants on the island were volatile with each other almost to the point of acid, and her hands had paid the price. Thankfully, it hadn't gone too deep, but it still left its mark and she'd had to train like hell to get back to usual skill level with her guns and knives. She wasn't looking forward to Chopper's reaction to her lovely scars, though she was interested in what Sanji's would be. It would definitely prove to me amusing at the least. She snickered at the thought, wincing when it pulled her wound and sighing. It looked like she was going to be making powder and bullet combinations and testing her accuracy with her guns and/or knives for a while. With a grunt she stood carefully and began to head for the beach. She was a bit bummed she didn't have any alcohol, but she wanted to sleep under the stars that night. The dirt soon gave way to sand and she broke the tree line with a wide smile as the familiar and comforting scent of the ocean hit her nose and filled her senses. She tossed the tiger skin she'd dragged with her down on the sand, tossing her bag down on top of it to keep it from moving before taking her shoes off and heading for the shoreline. The pirate stood on the wet sand, inhaling deeply as the icy cold water lapped at her bare feet. She closed her eyes, tilting her head back and basking in the dying light of the day. Her nakama's emotions tickled at the back of her mind, a familiar and comforting presence, and she began humming. She stayed there, simply humming as the sun finished setting and the moon glow, bathing her in its white light. Yo ho ho ho, 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 yo ho ho ho. Yo ho ho ho, yo ho 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 binkusu no sakeo, tadok ni yuku yo. Umakaze kimakase namimakase shio no mukoda, yuhi mo sawagu. Sora nya wa wokaku, tori no uta. She continued to sing the familiar and nostalgic song, twirling around in the ocean lightly so she didn't aggravate her wound, and only singing in the softest voice. She only had 6 months left before she could return to her nakama, and she couldn't wait. She wanted to see them again. She wanted to sing with them, laugh with them, fight and sail away with them. She wanted her family. Happy Danny grinned widely as Koopa came into sight, and she couldn't stop the giddy feeling from bubbling up inside of her. She was so close to seeing her nakama again. She steered her borrowed boat into the hidden boathouse at the end of the dock, and tied it off, before sneaking into the village. She didn't want to run into anyone she had befriended in Koopa, except Jojo and Cobra. She'd said her goodbyes and she didn't want to do it again. After she'd bought herself new clothing, she headed over to Cobra's first, checking instinctively for any threats or brats that should be playing with their friends in the forest. She entered the shop through the back, calling out, "Cobra-san?" "Danny-san?" Cobra asked as he came out from a side door, wiping his hands off on a stained rag. He raised an eyebrow at her appearance, taking in the new scars and the new clothes. "It's good to see ya." He quirked his lips at her and she smiled back, shrugging her shoulders. "It's good to see you too," she responded, tugging one of her earrings absently. "Did you get my request done?" Cobra snorted. "Did I? Do y'all even have to ask?" Danny rubbed the back of her neck sheepishly, and the blacksmith shook his head in amusement. "Yeah, I got what y'all wanted done. Let me go grab them." He disappeared into the side door again, and came out with a foot-long, 4-inch deep box. He held it out to her, opening the lid and revealing the neat lines of silver-colored bullets. "Specialized bullets, just as y'all asked." Danny ran her fingers over the finely crafted bullets and smiled. "How much do I owe you?" Cobra shook his head. "Nothing." He held his hand up to stall her protests. "I mean it. You're a friend. It's a gift for ya," he said firmly, and Danny backed down, cheeks flushing slightly. She smiled at him and took the box from him carefully. "Thank you." Cobra merely quirked his lips in response and she left, heading for Jojo's bar to get back her Vivre card and the letters she'd written and didn't need any more. Reaching the bar, she entered through the back like she had with the weapon shop, and knocked on the frame to get Jojo's attention. The woman spun at the noise, eyes widening at the sight of the pirate before she smiled so widely it threatened to split her face, and she tackled the pirate in a hug. Danny didn't budge an inch, catching the smaller woman and hugging her back just as tightly. "I came here for those letters and card I gave you," Danny said, squeezing once before letting go. "Also, I don't believe you'll be getting your boat back." Jojo shook her head, hair flying everywhere, and smile still stretched wide. "I wasn't expecting it back when I let y'all use it, Danny." "Stay right here, and let me go grab those papers," the bartender replied before she twirled off in a flurry of dark hair and white cloth. She returned quickly, hands full of 9 envelopes and a small card with Rayleigh written on it. "Here y'all are, Miss Pirate," she said teasingly, handing the papers over. Danny took them gratefully, slipping the Vivre card in her bag, before asking, holding up the envelopes, "You mind burning these for me?" Jojo took them silently, nodding and setting them on the counter to burn later. The small woman hugged the pirate again and said, "Be safe, okay?" Danny smiled, hugging her back. "Always. Now, I gotta go. I've got my nakama to get to." Jojo laughed brightly and let go, waving as the pirate left. A purple sash tied around her hips, one that the boys had given to her as a gift. Jojo smiled softly, leaning against the door frame, Danny long out of sight. It had been good to see the younger woman again. She looked much more happy and healthier than when she'd first arrived at Koopa, and she was glad for it. Shaking her head, the bartender went back inside to burn the letters and get back to her customers. Danny inhaled deeply, smiling widely and holding her hand out, the Vivre card on top of it, and began sailing in the direction it was pointing. She was going back to her nakama. Disturbance, bonus, Luffy frowned, turning his head to the west and opening his eyes, subsequently dodging the punch aimed for his head. Rayleigh paused, retracting his fist, and stared at his pupil in confusion. "Luffy?" the former pirate asked, but the teen didn't answer, instead brow furrowing deeply as he continued to stare west. The young captain scowled, worrying his bottom lip as he suddenly felt a disturbance in Danny. His gunner was in deep pain and utterly distraught. He didn't like it. Not one bit. Brow furrowing even deeper, he didn't seem to hear Rayleigh at all, who was trying to get the teen's attention, following his instincts. He shoved a soothing calm and worry in the direction he was feeling his nakama, trying to tell her it was going to be okay. She didn't have anything to worry about. He smiled when he felt Danny ease, before his instincts screamed at him and he ducked down and back, missing the kick aimed at him by a bare inch. He stared at Rayleigh with wide eyes, and then ducked into himself and rolled out of the way as he saw the man attack, not even realize he was moving before the silver-haired man even attacked. Rayleigh grinned. "Looks like you've got it, Luffy." The pirate captain stared at him in bewilderment. "Huh? Enter?" Danny smiled as she entered Shaki's bar, already knowing she and Rayleigh were already in there, feeling their presences. "Ray Gigi." "Shaki," she called out in greeting, striding over to the two at the bar, the tiger head on her head falling back to hang off her neck. Rayleigh stared at the woman, eyebrows raised and shocked despite himself. Shaki smiled back in greeting, already pulling down one of the good quality sakes and pouring the pirate a glass. "Danny-chan. It's good to see you," the bartender greeted back, sliding the full glass over to her as she took the stool next to Rayleigh. Danny took the drink, knocking it back and sighing blissfully as she put the glass down. "Damn, it's been a year since I've had any alcohol," she whined, stretching out across the bar and making grabby hands at the bottle. Rayleigh snorted, shaking himself out of his shock from the change in the woman. "Well, you look good, brat," he said, leaning against the bar. The pirate shot him a smirk, eyes flashing gold as she shot back. "You're not my type, you dirty old man." The former pirate sputtered and Shaki threw her head back and laughed. "So, who's all arrived so far?" she asked excitedly as Shaki poured her another glass. Shaki was the one who answered. "Zoro-chan arrived first, and then Frankie-chan arrived second about 6 days ago. Nami-chan got here third, and since she had some free time went shopping. Fourth was Usopp-chan, he arrived here yesterday. He went out to go find Nami, I believe." Danny's grin widened even further and the two former pirates wouldn't deny the shock they had at seeing it. The gunner for the Mugiwara pirates had seemed so tired and solemn when they'd met her those 2 years ago. In fact, they had been positive she'd actually been ill. To see her so healthy-looking and smiling brightly was quite the change. Rayleigh eyed the large tiger head resting on her back and the scars on her face and torso and wondered where she had ended up to receive such visible markings, when she'd been clear-skinned the last time he saw her. So far, Zoro had been the only one to show such a new visible scar. He reached out and tapped the 2 scars on her temple. They were older than the one on her torso and he'd placed them at about 2 years old, but she definitely hadn't gotten it when she'd been on Saibodi. "How'd you get these?" he asked, genuinely curious. Danny's smile disappeared and a dark look appeared on her face, her hand tightening around her cup. "A souvenir from the tiger on my back. I got them when Luffy lost his brother," she answered, her eyes bleeding gold and a low rumbling noise issuing forth from her throat. Rayleigh raised an eyebrow at the specific time when she'd gotten them, wondering how she knew that. He didn't ask though, realizing the scar was a touchy subject for her. Danny shook her head, smile back on her face as she downed her glass again, before setting it down on the bar and standing. "Well, I think I'm gonna drop my stuff off on the sunny and then go explore," she announced cheerfully, pulling the tiger head back on. "Since, I got kidnapped last time we were here and I felt like shit anyways, and then we got our asses kicked and sent flying, literally." She left, humming cheerfully and waving over her shoulder at the 2 former pirates, who were staring after her in bewilderment. The gunner quickly made her way towards the sunny, practically on the verge of skipping. She was going to see her nakama again. Her smile threatened to split her face in half when the sunny came into view and she stopped at the top of the hill, simply taking the ship in. A large figure suddenly moved onto the deck and she couldn't contain the squeal that left her. "Frankie!" she shouted gleefully, leaping from the hill and practically pouncing on the much larger cyborg. Frankie caught Danny, eyes wide in surprise behind his sunglasses. The smaller woman hugged him as fiercely as she could, inhaling the scent of metal, grease, and gunpowder and imprinting it in her memory, eye-bleeding gold. She pulled back, lips stretched in a wide grin, and before the cyborg could react planted a kiss on the corner of his mouth. "It's great to see you," she greeted brightly, landing on the deck lightly as he had let go of her in shock. Frankie sputtered, steam exploding from his ears. "Whoa, sister, it's good to see you too. But what was that?" Danny chuckled sheepishly, rubbing the back off her neck, and the cyborg finally took note of the fierce golden color the younger woman's eyes were as opposed to the familiar dark brown. "And what's with the super eyes?" "Family quirk," she answered, rocking back and forth on the balls of her feet. "The eyes, that is." "The kiss." Greeting between pack. It's instinctive now, sorry about that. She gave him a sheepish smile, eyes bleeding back to the dark brown he was much more familiar with. Frankie peered at her curiously and questioned, "Pack?" "Yup," she popped the smile returning to its wide grin, showing off her sharp canines. She didn't elaborate, and before he could ask even further she continued on a completely different topic. "I'm gonna go put my stuff in my room and then I'm gonna go exploring. I can't wait to see the others." Without another word she bounced off below deck, leaving behind a bewildered Frankie. Delight, Danny hummed to herself quietly, peering around at the buildings and people surrounding her. She was enjoying the island since she wasn't hacking up a lung this time, and there weren't any threats of being sold as a slave or sent flying to random islands. Her eyes caught a flash of orange, and her feet automatically turned in that direction, a grin beginning to split her face. The scent of tangerines tickled her nose and she inhaled deeply, closing her eyes briefly as she took the scent in. She broke through a crowd, entering one of the shopping malls that dotted the islands, and her now gold eyes zeroed in on the curvy orange-haired woman, directing a curly-haired, tan man on where to put her purchases. Danny's smile widened and her fingers twitched eagerly as she practically bounced over to the two, calling out in delight, "Nami, Usopp." Nami spun around first just as the other woman reached her, and smiled brightly, squealing, "Danny." The two hugged each other tightly, Danny actually lifting the smaller girl up off the ground and spinning her around. "It's so good to see you again, you look so different." Danny set Nami down and leaned down briefly to plant a chaste kiss on the corner of the navigator's mouth. "It's good to see you too. You've grown even more beautiful. I love your hair," she exclaimed as she pulled back, eyes bleeding back to dark brown. Nami blinked at her stupidly for a second, taken off guard by the kiss. Thanks," she stuttered in response, sounding more like she was asking than anything. Before the navigator could ask what the kiss was all about, Danny turned to Usopp and practically glomped the sharpshooter, planting a kiss on the corner of his mouth as well. Danny?" Usopp squealed in shock, cheeks flaming bright red in embarrassment. The gunner pulled back sheepishly and rubbed the back of her neck. "Whoops," she started, laughing slightly. "Sorry, it's an instinctive reaction." Nami and Usopp stared at her, and Nami pointed out slowly, "You didn't have this reaction before, did you?" "Nope," Danny answered, popping her and still smiling even as her eye turned gold and she inhaled silently, taking in Usopp's scent. It was wood and various plants-like smells. The sharpshooter let out a shriek when he noticed her eyes, pointing wildly and stammering, "Why, your eyes definitely didn't do that before." Nami gaped at her crewmate, and the gunner winced, smile shrinking slightly. She willed her eyes to go back to their usual color, her beast subsiding with an irritated growl. Usopp noticed the wince and shrinking smile and added hastily, "And not that it's a bad thing. They look really monster-ish." Nami elbowed the sharpshooter in the side, glaring and ceasing her gaping as she then turned to Danny and asked, "How'd that happen, anyways?" The three hopped onto the ride Nami had, and Usopp began driving back in the direction of the bar. It's a family quirk," Danny answered, relaxing slightly when she realized Usopp wasn't terrified of her, which was stupid in the first place. Usopp furrowed his brow and asked in confusion, "Your dad can do that too?" He just couldn't picture it. Nami frowned, thinking back to all the articles she'd read about Ben Beckman. None of them ever mentioned the pirate having that type of quirk, and it would have been mentioned if he did. Danny shook her head, "It's not from my dad. It's from my mom. Only certain members of the family ever get the ability, though." Nami had a feeling there was more to it than just that, but she didn't pry. She didn't think the gunner would react well to any of them prodding her family history, even Luffy. "So, does the eye thing have anything to do with the kissing?" Nami asked curiously, and Usopp's cheeks flamed at the reminder. Danny grinned and held her finger up to her mouth, "Secret." Nami huffed, pouting slightly, and Usopp snorted, hiding a smile under his hat. The sharpshooter stopped the ride, however, when he noticed a certain reindeer running in their direction. He grinned and held an arm up in a wave and called out, "Hey, Chopper." The reindeer pulled to an abrupt stop, looking confused for a second before he recognized the trio and made an excited noise. Usopp rushed over to the doctor, holding his arms out and grinning widely, "Whoa! You sure have gotten bigger. I bet you're even easier to ride now, huh? How've you been?" Chopper didn't get any time to answer the sharpshooter as he suddenly got a whiff of predator run run run, and then Danny's voice rang through his ears. Chopper, you've gotten even cuter since I've seen you last. He shook the animal instinct away, focusing on his crewmate, and started slightly when he realized the scent was coming from her. Danny? He questioned, voice a bit small and wary. The gunner pulled back from her hug, eyes and smile soft. Don't worry, she murmured lowly, so the other two didn't hear. Your pack. She let her eyes flash gold and she made a soothing, purr-like noise, rubbing her cheek against his. Then, she pulled away and her eyes were back to their warm dark brown, and Nami was hugging him. It's true, you're fluffier than before, she squealed happily, and Chopper shook himself out of his confusion over to Danny. Nami pulled away, smiling. Long time no see, Chopper. However, that confusion was replaced by confusion over Nami. Huh? Nami? Well, yeah? The navigator responded, sounding amused. Chopper shook himself again, his earlier panic returning as he exclaimed, No. That's right, I'm happy to see you again, but this isn't the time for that, Robin's in big trouble. Danny chuckled and easily waved off Chopper's anger at the response. Don't worry, Chopper. Nami will explain. In the meantime, I'm going to continue my exploring, so you guys head back to the ship, alright? She smiled, patting the doctor between the eyes soothingly. I'll meet up with you guys later. With one last wave, she easily vanished into the crowd, leaving Nami and Usopp behind to explain to Chopper about the imposters. Danny's ears perked up when a familiar voice said slowly, as if talking to a child, Marines. Come. Run. Ship. Got it. She immediately veered her path towards the voice, nose twitching and eyes shadowed under the tiger head perched on her head. She'd taken to wearing it around the island on the off chance someone would actually recognize her. It also kept most idiots away from her. What am I, a baby? Use sentences, another all too familiar voice shouted in response, irritation evident. Her beast chuffed, letting out a low rumbling noise to voice its pleasure. She found more members of her pack. Sanji responded blandly with, I figured that was good enough for an idiot whose brain is nothing but muscle. Danny drew closer to her two fellow crewmates and a grin was slowly stretching across her face as her eyes bled gold. Freaking out a few of the people on the streets who noticed, she inhaled deeply, filtering out all the other scents and focusing on her two packmates. Sanji smelled of cloves and cooking oil, and her body thrummed at the comforting scent of the cloves. Zoro on the other hand smelled of steel and alcohol, which appealed to her almost just as much. Alright, I'll kill you later, Zoro growled, before he jabbed his thumb to the right and continued, but does that island seem kinda noisy to you? Yeah. Noisy. There, Sanji said slowly, expression flat. Zoro's hand twitched, pushing one of his swords out of its sheath slightly in preparation for a quick draw. But he didn't get to as Danny finally reached them, putting herself between them and chirping cheerfully. Sounds like fun. Wanna bet our captain's involved? She linked her arms with the two men, eyes still gold, and pecked each of them on the corner of the mouth, and added, Let's go see what trouble our captain's brewing, yeah. Zoro sputtered, what the hell was that for? Sanji was silent, jaw dropped and eyes wide, looking to be in complete shock as he stared at her uncomprehendingly. Danny's eyes glittered with laughter as she responded cheerfully, greeting between pack. Now let's go. I wanna see Captain. She tugged on the two men's arms, urging them forward just as an explosion rocked the area. Ooh, that sounds promising. Zoro spluttered as he stumbled forward, wondering when the hell the woman had gotten so physically strong. Sanji stumbled, jaw closing with a sharp click but looking like he was about to faint instead. Another explosion sounded, and Danny rolled her eyes before whining, Let's go. Already. That got them running and Danny's grin widened. She was gonna see Luffy. They reached the source of all the commotion, just in time to see Luffy laughing and smiling widely as he ran away from the smoking husk of one of the pacifistas. Hey, Luffy! Zoro called out, running on his own now. Danny have unlinked their arms for easier maneuverability. Luffy! I knew it! Why are you always smack dab in the middle of trouble? Sanji yelled, trying to sound annoyed but it mostly came off as fond exasperation. Danny didn't say anything, her emotions close to overwhelming her as she laid eyes on her captain. Happiness threatened to bubble over and she could barely contain her excitement. Oh, Luffy exclaimed, grin widening even further. Zoro, Sanji. Wah. This time I'm sure it's you. Long time. No see, Danny couldn't stop herself from squealing, even as a pacifista appeared in front of them, leaping over the thing easily just as Sanji slammed his leg in its neck and Zoro sliced it in two. The tiger head flew off her head as she fell through the air, straight at Luffy. Her lips were stretched in a wide grin, canines glinting in the light as she shouted gleefully, "Luffy!" She crashed into her captain, the pacifista exploding behind her, and in front of Marines and pirates alike, kissed him on the corner of the mouth, though from their point of view it looked like she was kissing him soundly on the mouth fully. Luffy laughed, taking the kiss in stride and exclaiming happily, "Danny. It's the Straw Hat Pirates. The real ones. They're totally different, they're nothing like the fakes." Zoro and Sanji joined their gunner and captain and Zoro greeted the rubber man with, "Hey, Luffy, you're number 9. Sanji snarled and snapped, "Shut up. How long are you gonna keep bragging about that?" He then turned to Luffy and said calmly, "Luffy, we've gotta hurry. The ship's waiting." Luffy's grin widened even further, not minding Danny a bit, who was hanging off him despite being taller and bigger than him. "Right?" he cheered. "Man, I'm so happy to see you. It's been 2 years." Danny purred, rubbing her cheek against the top of Luffy's head, and basking in his happy and excited emotions. Pirate Hunter Zoro, Black Leg Sanji, and Darkhole crews on this island, they're all alive. Luffy smelled like rubber and the sea and her beast rumbled in pleasure as she imprinted the scent in her mind. Sanji and Zoro started running back in the direction of the ship, but paused when they noticed that Danny and Luffy weren't following. Danny had let go of her captain and was grinning widely in the same direction as Luffy. "Hey, what's the matter?" Zoro called back. Luffy ignored him and called out, "Really?" Shocked cries and mutters exploded as they noticed Rayleigh for the first time. The former pirate laughed and called back, "I thought I'd better check in on you, but it looks like it wasn't necessary. Your skills have become even more polished." Luffy nodded and agreed, mouth still stretched in that all too impossibly wide grin. "Well, then you'd better hurry and join your friends." Luffy let his bag fall to the ground behind him as he shouted at his teacher, "Yeah? Rayleigh, thanks for all you did these past 2 years." "There's no need for that," Rayleigh laughed, "just hurry up and go." Luffy raised his fist in the air, emotions firming in a strong resolution and promise as he called, "Rayleigh, I'm gonna do it." He raised both arms in the air and shouted, laughing gleefully, "I'm going to be the Pirate King." "Human, are we setting sail, Nami?" Luffy asked, arms crossed and face serious. Nami nodded, "Yes. Go right ahead, Captain." Danny perked up, turning her attention to her captain from where she had been staring at Brook, her beast rumbling. She had to fight the urge to just start gnawing on the skeleton's arm or leg or something. "All right, guys," Luffy started, voice echoing around the ship. "There's tons of stuff I've wanted to say to you, but for now I'll just say thank you for putting up with my selfishness these past 2 years." Sanji snorted, "Just these past 2 years?" Usopp laughed and added, "Seriously, you've always been selfish." Danny huffed out a short laugh, lips tugged in a wide smile. Her beast was purring contently, surrounded by pack and everyone safe and happy. Luffy inhaled deeply as the ship sank deeper and deeper beneath the waves and shouted, "Here we go! Fishman Island! Here we come!" The ship was submerged completely and Danny tackled Robin, now that they were safe and away from the potential battle. "Robin," she sung cheerily, rubbing their cheeks together briefly and then planting a kiss on the corner of the archaeologist's mouth. Robin smiled, chuckling and kissing the gunner on the corner of her mouth in return. "Danny," she said warmly, ignoring the staring of the rest of the crew easily. "How have you been?" Danny's grin widened, showing off her canines and answered brightly, "Never been better. I've got some things for you, by the way. I know you'll just love them." "Oh," Robin asked interestedly. "What is it?" Before Danny could respond, Zoro interrupted with, "Seriously, what's with the kissing?" Luffy laughed, putting his hands behind his head, while Usopp, Nami, Frankie and Sanji nodded in agreement. Though Sanji's face was red and looked faintly pained at agreeing with the swordsman, Brook simply stared, confused. Chopper was the one who answered, "Surprisingly, it's an animal instinct. It's mostly found among wolves. It's how they greet each other between pack members." The reindeer cocked his head to the side and said tentatively, "Danny's more animal than human now." Danny didn't get to answer as Usopp blinked in confusion and pointed out, "But she doesn't look more animal than human." The gunner rolled her eyes and then flashed her fangs at him and let her eyes bleed gold, making a purr-like sound that a human throat wouldn't have been able to make. Usopp let out a squeal, jumping back in shock, whereas Luffy did the complete opposite and leaned forward with sparkling eyes and exclaiming, "So cool! You've got monster eyes." Danny's pupils constricted into slits, her lips twisting into a grimace. "Please don't call them that," she grimaced, unpleasant memories rising to the surface. Luffy stared at her with wide, curious eyes, and looked like he was going to ask why, but Brook suddenly laughed and asked, "Do I get a greeting as well, Miss Danny?" Danny stared at him silently for a minute, before shaking her head and saying, "No, chew toys don't get greetings." There was silence and then the rest of the crew burst into laughter, while Brook sunk down to the deck and began growing mushrooms as he drew circles with his finger on the deck. Danny paused, cocking her head to the side just as Usopp called out frantically, "Hey, everyone, there's a shadow that looks like a ship coming from behind." The gunner stood, excitement thrumming through her body, and a wicked smile spread across her face. "A ship?" Brook called out. Usopp nodded, beginning to head back down the stairs. "It's shooting straight toward us." There was a shout of, "Charge!" and the roar of a large beast, before the oncoming ship slammed into the side of Sunny. Danny's eyes bled gold, and she scowled in anger. "How dare they!" The shouts of the rest of the crew went in through one ear and out the other. "Hey, wait a minute!" Nami shouted, eyes wide. "Momu?" The sea cow stopped, puzzled and looked down at the small woman. "You're Momu from Arlong's crew, aren't you?" It stared at the navigator, its eyes widening before its eyes shot towards Sanji and Luffy. I think we've seen this guy before, eh, Luffy?" the cook asked. Luffy stared up at the cow and asked, "Really?" Momu promptly freaked, but Danny was paying attention to him. She was staring at the man that had just stepped onto their ship, a wicked grin on his face as he shouted, "Follow me. Ya bastards!" There was an answering roar from his crew and Chopper shrieked, whereas Zoro was preparing to draw his swords. "Now, while they're dumbfounded, kill every last one of them." Danny continued to stare as Momu shot off with a strangled cry of fear, dragging the opposing ship behind him. The rest of the crew joined Danny in staring at the pirate on their ship as the man shouted, "Now, for our introduction, let the Gatling gun rip. Slaughter all Straw Hats." There was dead silence as he realized his crew had not followed him and he was standing alone in front of a notorious crew. It was a nice attempt, Danny pointed out, a mocking smile on her lips as her gold eyes bored into him. Frankie picked the pirate up, who immediately started pleading, "Stop, whatever you do, don't throw me in the ocean, please, anything but that, gentlemen. That's the one thing you're not allowed to do. Human life isn't supposed to be wasted like this. God's watching. You hear? You know he is, right?" Danny took note of the fact that he didn't want to be thrown into the ocean, rather than be stabbed, or shot at, or something else. Frankie threw him against the railing, rolling his eyes. "Man, are you singing a different tune now? What was all that about Gatling guns and killing everybody?" Danny crouched down next to the pirate, cocking her head to the side and sniffing curiously. Zoro stared down at him boredly and asked, "Who the hell are you, anyways? You're the captain of that ship that went by, right?" Danny wrinkled her nose as the man's blood-soaked stench filled her senses and she hissed, lips pulled back and baring fangs. "You smell disgusting," she growled lowly, eyes glowing faintly as her pupils constricted into slits. No, not in my wildest dreams would I ever be captain," he cried out in response to Zoro, obviously freaking out about the famous pirate hunter. He was also glancing over at Danny fearfully as well, obviously scared out of his wits by her eyes and fangs. They've been abusing me as a human bullet." He bowed down low to the floor, continuing with his lie, "I'm so sick of being on that ship I tell ya. Yeah, this is perfect. Would you mind if I rode on your ship for a bit? Please, I'm begging you." Chopper looked at him in concern. Hey, this guy might actually be a bit of a victim." Danny growled. Chopper squeaked. "Like hell he is," Usopp shouted. "Everything he's saying is a lie," Chopper squealed, staring at the sharpshooter in shock. Nami came into the conversation, asking, "Hey, wait. What was with that sea cow pulling your ship?" The navigator stared down at the pirate with a faint grimace. He licked his lips with his abnormally long tongue, eyes glowing with lust. "Oh my. What a cutie. You're the cat burglar, aren't you?" Sanji's foot smashed into the prisoner's face at the same time as Danny slammed the butt of her black rifle in his stomach, a nasty snarl marring her face. "How dare you look at our beautiful navigator with such despicable eyes?" Sanji roared furiously. Danny glared down at the downed pirate, eyes glowing menacingly as she hissed, "Never look at any of my crew like that or I will gouge out your eyes. Do you understand me?" "One." Caribou whimpered, nodding slightly and blood gushing from his nose and mouth and a few of his teeth were missing. He shakily lifted himself up slightly and began to answer Nami's question. "That's just a sea monster we caught in the vicinity. Having a creature like that pulling their ship is called advanced sea navigation." Nami perked up slightly, and Luffy butted into the conversation, bright smile on his face as he placed a calming hand on the small of Danny's back. "EHH? Really?" He looked around curiously, grin stretched wide and asked, "Is there a sea cow anywhere around here?" Nami's sweat dropped. "Hold on. Luffy, what are you planning?" Her captain ignored her completely, having procured a stick from somewhere and was currently poking their prisoner with it. Danny was crouched next to him, cheek on her hand and watching with vague interest, eyes once more dark brown. The gunner listened with half an ear as Nami explained the currents and salinity of their course, and the subsequent fact that they would be taking a current downward. She closed her eyes, immersing herself in her crew's emotions, enjoying the hilarity and joy that was so familiar and so much missed. "Nami, while you were talking it came into view," Robin called out, catching the entire crew's attention. "Really? Ooh. Where are the mysterious sea currents?" Luffy called out excitedly, climbing up onto the top of Sunny's head. "What does a sea current that goes downward look like?" Danny crawled up beside her captain, curious as well. Frankie and Chopper came up behind them and Usopp was on the other side of Danny. "Oh, is that it? Woo. Mother Nature really knows how to get things done," Frankie crowed, and Chopper and Sanji gaped at the sight before them. Nami let out a breathless laugh. "That's a downward plume. It's just like a giant, undersea waterfall." Danny stared in awe, leaning forward against Sunny's head and taking in the sight of the fast-paced water current. Robin chuckled next to her. "Wow. What a massive flow. I wonder how many hundreds of meters it is in diameter." "This is awesome," Luffy shouted gleefully, mouth stretched in an impossibly wide grin. "Hearing it is one thing, but seeing it is something completely different. Yo-ho-ho-ho." Brook laughed cheerily. Usopp gaped, eyes nearly popping out of their sockets as he stared down at the bottom of the waterfall, screeching, "I can't see the bottom. It's pitch black darkness down there. This is the end. With that speed, it'll just smash us into the bottom of the ocean." Danny smiled and chirped, "At least we'll all die together, nay?" Usopp let out a low whine, tears streaming down his face and pulling his hood down over his eyes. Nami bit her lip and said worriedly, "Is it really safe to ride a current like this?" "Don't worry about the ship. The Sunny is the strongest vessel there is. Born from atom wood." Frankie laughed loudly, pride evident in his voice and stance. Caribou's voice suddenly sounded, shouting, "Hey, Straw Hats, turn back immediately. This is bad." Danny narrowed her eyes, dragging them away from the waterfall and piercing straight into the bound pirate. "What the?" Zoro muttered, turning his head slightly to stare down at the pirate. "Oh yeah. I forgot you were here. Look closely at the bottom," Caribou shouted, ignoring Zoro. "I've never heard of one of those living in a place like this. Never known satisfaction where killing is concerned. It is a demon, running about the great deep and preying on ships. The enemy of the human race." Everyone leaned over the side of the ship, peering down into the darkness. "That's a kraken." Danny stared down at the beast, mouth dropping open in awe. "It can crush multiple ships in a single blow. It must have been here feeding off ships that set sail the past few days." Frankie shouted, eyes bulging. "What size?" Usopp shrieked from next to Chopper, who was close to foaming at the mouth. "It's a monster octopus." Danny ignored Caribou's shouting, staring down at the kraken with sparkling eyes, and Luffy announced with a cheerful smile, I got a good idea. I'm gonna tame the little guy." Before anyone could really register the insane statement, Danny squealed, "It's so adorable. Luffy, we've gotta have it." "Gloves," Danny frowned, rubbing her hands through her gloves, but it did nothing to relieve the stiffness. Sighing, she pulled her gloves off and stuffed them in her back pocket, staring down at her scars with distaste. She slowly massaged her hands with her fingers, but since both hands were slightly stiff, it was doing as much as she wished. The coldness of the deep sea was irritating the scars, and thus the stiffness. She glanced over at her nakama, frowning as she was reminding that 3 of them were missing. She wasn't too worried about them, since Luffy wasn't feeling as if he was in danger. In fact, he was having the time of his life according to the giddy emotions she was getting from the rubber man. But she didn't like not having them close to her, or not knowing where they were. Her beast growled in agreement, pacing inside her mind, and she fought back the urge to do the same. It's certainly gotten weaker. While this darkness looks to be stirring up even more unrest, Brook noted worriedly. Usopp groaned, face pale, as he panicked, "We're really gonna make no progress at this rate. What should we do?" Nami frowned tightly, breath misting out in front of her as she answered sternly, "We can't stop the ship. So don't overlook a single thing." Danny continued to rub her hands, focusing on them for a moment. She jerked slightly when the ship lurched and the air on the ship lessened a bit. She frowned, looking up to see what had caused Frankie to pull a coup de burst. The gunner blinked mildly as she was greeted with the sight of a huge ass fist chomping down on a no doubt poisonous jellyfish just as large. Brook was the one to make note of the less amount of air. The air within the ship really has lessened a bit. It's better than getting eaten." Chopper was leaning against the railing, jaw dropped, as he exclaimed, "The jellyfish was eaten. But the fish that ate it flopped over. So they possessed nerve poisons, after all," Robin noted. Danny pulled up next to the archaeologist, eyeing the jellyfish curiously, still rubbing her hands. Robin caught the motion of the gunner's hands, and frowned minutely at the sight of the gruesome scars covering the other woman's hands. She reached out and began to massage the hands, making Danny jerk and look up at her with wide eyes. "What caused these scars?" Danny hummed, relaxing as the stiffness of her hands slowly disappeared under the devil fruit user's hands, and answered, "Volatile plants. They didn't react well together." Robin made a small noise in response, 2 more arms appearing so that she could have 2 hands each massaging one of Danny's hands. "How much are they bothering you?" Robin inquired softly, listening to their crewmates with half an ear as they talked about the sea creature's eyes. Danny shrugged loosely, a rumbling purr escaping her throat. "They're just stiff because of the cold," she rumbled, eyes going half Masvos, certainly skilled with her hands. "There are also creatures whose eyes have evolved," Robin pointed out a little late, as one of the fish reacted to Usopp's taunts by lunging at him. Danny snickered, and Robin's massaging slowed down a bit as she felt the muscles begin to loosen and relax beneath her fingers. "Everyone," Brook called out, catching everyone's attention. The skeleton was holding out a loop of rope and he continued once he had everyone's attention, "That pirate gentleman. Do you know where he is right now?" "Ah," Usopp said. "Now that you mention it, we did have him aboard, I completely forgot." Danny blinked languidly, eyes flashing gold and inhaling deeply as Robin's hands slowed to a stop completely. Chopper looked around worriedly and asked, "Where'd he go?" "I haven't seen him since we've arrived in deep sea," Robin mentioned idly, her extra arms vanishing as she pulled away from Danny, the gunner pulling her gloves back on before Chopper could catch sight of her scarred hands. She was sniffing the air slightly, wrinkling when she caught the wayward pirate's stench. "Maybe he was thrown off when we entered the downward current," Usopp suggested. Danny shook her head and pointed out, "No, the ropes would have gone with him. I think he escaped. And I'm pretty sure he's eating a devil fruit." She blinked at them idly when they all stared at her, and then Nami reacted. "Then that means he's somewhere on the ship?" "Ew," the navigator grimaced. Robin looked at Danny and asked curiously, "How do you figure he's eaten a devil fruit?" Danny shrugged, yawning slightly, canines glinting in the low light as she answered, his response when Frankie captured him. He begged not to be thrown into the ocean, rather than being killed in another way. Most people wouldn't make the assumption of being thrown into the ocean as being the first way to be killed when captured. She was quickly proven right when Frankie found him liquidized in a barrel. The next few moments were a mess of dodging creatures in sweltering heat and being tricked by a sea devil, which was just barely avoided and then saved by a giant person. Then music started playing. Danny wrinkled her nose at the choice in music, muttering, "I enjoy Brooke's choice in music much better." Slowly through the smoke a large, worn ship with ripped sails and barnacle-infested wood appeared. "Oh my," Danny said, holding a hand to her cheek. "Not again." Brooke explained the story behind the Flying Dutchman, and Danny wrinkled her nose. What a terrible man. Her eyes burned gold when the order for the Umibuzu to smash their ship and a growl ripped through her throat. Before the large fist could smash into their ship, the Kraken appeared, slamming a curled tentacle into the Umibuzu's face in a wicked punch. The Kraken continued to punch the giant man, and then Luffy's voice rang clear. "Hey, that's enough. Stop it." The octopus monster stopped, peering back eagerly, and Luffy praised, "Good boy." The moment Luffy was back on the ship, Danny tackled the captain in a hug, squealing, "You do love me, he's so adorable." Luffy laughed loudly, wrapping his arms around the gunner easily in a return hug. Nami sighed, sweat dropping and muttering, "I can't believe this. You actually tamed the monster octopus." Luffy turned to her with a bright smile, seeming oblivious to the fact that Danny was rubbing her cheek on the top of his head and smiling blissfully. "Yeah, I'm gonna make him a top-notch navigator," Luffy exclaimed, before turning to the octopus and saying, "Right, Tsurume? Don't name him like he's a squid." Danny blinked, her eyes open, head popping up and saying in response to the exasperated shout, "Why not? I think it's cute." The rest of the crew face-palmed, while Luffy laughed gleefully, clutching his stomach. Fortunate Danny was immediately hugging Luffy when the boy jerked away, coughing up water, while the other three boys cheered. The gunner planted a kiss on the corner of Luffy's mouth in greeting, rubbing her cheek against his and making a rumbling noise deep in her chest. Luffy returned the greeting with a confused grin as he looked around in bewilderment. "Ah, Luffy-chin." Luffy turned in the direction of the voice, blinking, Kami smiled as she greeted brightly, "I'm so glad you're all right. How do you feel?" A wide smile split Luffy's face and he cheered excitedly. "Ah, it's Kami. Long time no see." Danny stretched across her captain's lap, eyes glowing gold, and pupils blown wide. She continued to make that rumbling noise, nuzzling the rubber boy's leg with her face, eyes half-masked. Luffy peered down at her curiously. "Sorry, I meant to go pick you all up, but I ended up being a month off in how I remembered the date," Kami said sheepishly, rubbing the back of her head and sweat dropping. Luffy pulled himself away from staring Danny to ask excitedly, "Did we make it to Fishman Island?" Chopper threw his arms up exuberantly as he answered brightly, "Yeah. Fortunately, the mermaids saved us when we were drowning." Usopp chuckled deeply, holding his chin as he said, "To tell the truth, all three of us were all unconscious until just now." "Eh? You three? What about Danny?" Luffy asked curiously, looking down at the purring woman still sprawled across his lap, face pressed against his side. The three shared a look and Usopp answered slowly, "She was awake before us, but she hasn't said a word. Only greeted us, before moving to your side. Her eyes have been gold the entire time though." The sharpshooter shrugged, and then Chopper added, "The best I can make is that when we were all drowning, Danny's beast took over, and Danny hasn't woken up herself yet," the doctor explained. "Eh?" Luffy said, most of it going straight over his head. He peered down at his gunner and poked her cheek repeatedly, calling out, "Danny! Wake up! We're at Fishman Island. Come on." Gold eyes stared up at him unblinkingly, before slowly they faded to dark brown and Danny was staring up at her captain in confusion. She sat up, staring around at her surroundings in bewilderment. This is Kami's house," Sanji explained as he tossed Luffy's straw hat onto the boy's head. "Here's your hat." Danny hummed, waving at said mermaid in greeting with a smile. She stretched languidly across the bed and asked with a pleased groan as her back popped, "Where's everyone else?" "Well, it looks like we got split up," Chopper answered worriedly. "I hope everyone's alright." Luffy grinned easily. "Oh, I'm sure they'll manage somehow on their end, though." Sanji nodded in agreement and added, "Bones won't be of any use in the sea, but they've got Robo and Green, so they'll be alright. I chased after their silhouettes up until a certain point, but in the end we five got washed up here." Kami brought over the soup she'd prepared, and after they'd all eaten and changed into their newly dried clothes, Kami began to explain just where exactly they were. "This is the part of the seafloor known as the Mermaid Cove," she started excitedly, pointing around. "This is the female dorm for the town's mermaid cafe, so a lot of my friends are here." Sanji jerked and stammered, eyes wide. "F female dorm? M mermaid cafe? What is that?" Kami smiled innocently and answered, "It's the shop where I'm currently working as a waitress. There are a lot of beautiful mermaids here." Sanji looked about ready to faint, and Danny watched him in amusement as he forced himself to stay conscious. "Let's go up top, I'll introduce you to my friends." Danny snickered and stretched again, raising her arms up above her head as she drawled, "This should be fun, haunting." "Ladies," Danny smiled, propping herself up on one of the many rocks lining the cove and treading water contentedly. The mermaids giggled, smiling in return, while one of them actually began to unbraid the pirate's hair so she could play with the long tresses. "Could you all do me a favor?" A mermaid with red hair and a striped tail leaned forward curiously, cupping her chin with her hands. A favor, Danny-chan?" The pirate hummed an answer and continued, seeing she had the group of girls' attention. "Yeah, we had a prisoner on our ship, but because of our entrance, I don't know where he is." "A prisoner?" one of the mermaids parroted, green eyes wide. Danny nodded. "Yeah, he tried to attack us on the way down. He has a devil fruit, though, so he's locked in a barrel. Just if you guys see the barrel, please don't try and open it." She frowned slightly, brow furrowed, and added, "I don't want any of you getting hurt because of something we brought." Two of the mermaids squealed and glomped the pirate, exclaiming, "Danny-chan, you're the best. And you look so cool." The two let out another couple of squeals before they joined in on playing with the woman's hair, chattering excitedly. A sudden commotion brought them out of their playing, and Danny cocked her head to the side and sunk down a bit further in the water. Her hair was floating through the water, the dark tresses looking a bit like someone had spilled ink in the water, creating a rather haunting picture as her eyes glowed gold just above the water's surface. The three mermaids that had been playing with her hair surrounded her, their tails coiling around her slightly and hiding the fact that she did not in fact have a fishtail, though she looked like a mermaid herself. Danny's eyes flickered around the cove, pinpointing her crewmates through their feelings rather than sight, before she heard Kami exclaim, "Huh? A royal gondola? There's no way an actual member of the royal family would be on there, though. Why would they come all the way from Ryugu Palace to a tiny little corner on the island like this?" One of the mermaids commented, painted lips smiling a bit sardonically. As if to prove her wrong, trumpets sounded loudly and a voice announced the presence of the princes. "Hello, ladies of the cove. I have a question for you," a deep voice rumbled, but Danny couldn't see who spoke and her mind was sidetracked by the different emotions she was getting from her crewmates. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper felt confused and a bit nervous, more so in the case of Usopp and Chopper, but Sanji. She sweat dropped and sighed inaudibly, "You idiot." She listened with half an ear as the princes asked after a group of illegal entries, to which the mermaids all lied and said no. Danny had to wonder why they wanted to know though. Wouldn't it be up to the guards to deal with illegal entries? Her thoughts were brought to a sharp stop, as was everyone else, as blood suddenly gushed and the mermaid that had been hiding Sanji let out a shrill scream. The next few minutes were a bit of a blur for Danny. She stayed hidden, even as the other three all rushed out to Sanji's side. Normally, she would have been the first to the cook's side, but something was telling her to stay out of sight. So, with great trepidation, she stayed where she was, treading water and glaring angrily the entire time. The anger was enough to distract her from the worry coiling in her gut about the amount of blood loss the cook had, but not by much. Somehow, she managed to catch Luffy's eye before they left on the stolen creature, indicating she was staying, which he nodded subtly at before they were gone. Threatened? "This is really a problem, you all." One of the princes sighed, making Danny furrow her brow in confusion. "Why were you covering for those pirates?" "We're sorry, Prince Fukaboshi," the mermaids chorused. A curly-haired mermaid smiled serenely and said, "They said they were Kami's friends." "And they weren't bad people," another mermaid added. "We felt it would be too sad for them to be arrested for illegal entry." Danny cocked her head to the side at the varying emotions around her, too much of them to focus on anyone exactly. "You were jumping to conclusions," Fukaboshi interrupted before any more of the girls could start talking. They're already famous pirates. So regardless of whether they entered this country illegally or not, we more or less know who they are. Then why had they been looking for them? Danny wondered, shifting through the water until she was near one of the rocks, and thus could pull herself out of the water if need be, but still be able to dive underwater. "Oh, really?" one of the mermaids that had been playing with Danny's hair earlier exclaimed, feeling a bit guilty for jumping to conclusions. "Now, we lost our chance to give them Jinbei's message," Fukaboshi murmured lowly, but Danny's ears caught the murmur and she immediately pulled herself up onto the rock, hair spilling out around her like waterfall of black ink. The movement brought everyone's attention to her, but she paid them no mind, focusing on the princes instead. "Perhaps you haven't lost your chance, she said, lips quirked in a slightly mischievous smile. "A message from Jinbei, was it?" She began to braid her hair with deft fingers, peering at the startled faces of the princes with amusement flicking in her eyes. "And you are?" Fukaboshi finally asked. Danny hummed, cocking her head to the side, and bringing her hair over her shoulder as she continued to braid. "Danny Beckman, gunner of the Mugiwara pirates," she answered easily, before tacking on tauntingly, "You may have heard of me?" The princes all shared a look before Fukaboshi began speaking. "Jinbei had 2 messages for Mugiwara Luffy." Danny tied off the first braid and began on the other section of her hair, making an inquiring hum to indicate him to continue. "The first is, do not fight with Hody. The second is, I'm waiting in the sea forest." "Oh," Danny made an interested noise, an intrigued smile spreading across her face. "How interesting." She quickly finished off her second braid, tying it off, before she stood, stretching languidly and making a pleased hum. "Well, when I run into my captain again, I'll be sure to tell him." Fukaboshi eyed her shrewdly before inquiring, "Will you not follow after him and your comrade? You could find them, could you not?" The pirate let out a laugh as she grabbed her clothes from their place tucked amongst the rocks and away from the water. She sat down on the rock and pulled her stockings, one up, wiggling her toes as she answered, "I could, of course. But my captain tends to get caught up in things, and I wish to explore the island at my own pace for once." She stood and pulled her shorts up, buttoning them up as she continued, ignoring the various looks she was getting from the natives. "Granted, with our luck we'll meet sooner than later, and probably with our lives threatened for whatever reason." Pulling on her top and then her gloves, she grabbed her sash, the 3 charms clinking together as she picked up the purple fabric, and tied it around her hips. The pirate sat down again to pull on her boots, humming and then adding cheerfully, "Should be loads of fun." "Having your lives threatened?" the prince questioned unsurely, eyeing the strange woman in trepidation. She gave off a wild feeling that set his teeth on edge and he wasn't sure how to react to her exactly. Sudden gold eyes met his own and a dangerous smile curled at her lips as she purred, "That's up to you." Then the golden eyes were gone as she ducked her head to tie her laces. She hopped up, rocking on her feet slightly and acting as if nothing was wrong, even though she'd sent shivers down the 3 princes' spines. She gave the surrounding underwater beings a toothy grin and a wave, saying cheerily, "I'll be taking my leave then." Mindless Danny had been wandering a bit mindlessly after leaving the Mermaid Cove behind, vaguely following the faint trail of Roas, feeling a bit antsy having been separated from her crew again after only just being together once more, but it wasn't as nerve-wracking as before. She could feel them all now, and so knew they weren't in any danger. She had decided on going after Robin, though, because she was the calmest out of the crew and just what she needed to soothe frazzled nerves. The pirate was aware she'd been acting rather out of character from before the 2 years, but seeing and being with her crew again had just made her so happy she couldn't contain herself. But she was starting to calm down again, but not fully, thus following Robin. The sudden surge in the crowds around her had her tensing and frantically climbing up one of the buildings lining the streets to get to the roof, and thus away from the crowds. Crouching on the roof, eyes wide and somewhat wild, she stared down at the street trying to find the source of the sudden surge in the crowds. Their calls and shouts about a Madam Shirley, and gold eyes zeroed in on a shark mermaid clutching at her head and shouting, "Go find him, the pirate boy with the ripped straw hat. Send him out, please, get him out of this nation at once." The frantic mermaid cried out, voice panicked and fearful. Danny frowned, wondering what the hell she was going about. She strained her ears to hear the shark's next words in response to one of the fishmen's questions. "I didn't intend to see it, but I felt something from that child. so I just happened to look to the future. She clutched her head harder and leaned against the ground harshly, moaning in pain. I hope I'm wrong. I want to be incorrect, she murmured desperately, eyes tearing up. By a human with a ripped straw hat. Mugiwara Luffy, by his hands Fishman Island will be destroyed. That's not good, Danny murmured softly, scooting back from the edge of the roof and into the shadow of the doorway downstairs. Her eyes slowly bled back to brown as she frowned, before she shot one last glance down at the shocked and slowly becoming angered crowd and hopped silently to the next roof. She wanted to reach Robin soon. She could feel a seething source of hatred beneath everything here on the island and it set her teeth on edge. Contagious. Oh, it's Robin, Danny chirped, spotting the older woman finishing an attack on someone. She quickened her pace and with a hop pounced on the woman. Robin, she pecked the corner of the woman's mouth in greeting, inhaling her scent deeply at the same time, purring at the sweet smell. She loosened her grip on Robin, smiling up at her brightly and already feeling herself calm down from the soothing presence of her crewmate. Danny, Robin greeted in return, smiling. Are you joining me to go to the forest? Danny nodded, letting go of her completely and trotting next to her as they entered the fish bus that would take them to where they wanted. Danny took a seat next to Robin, resting her head against the bigger woman's shoulder and making a low rumbling sound. Foo, you've certainly grown more affectionate, the archaeologist commented, an arm sprouting from behind the animalistic girl and stroking her hair. Danny hummed in agreement, I have my pack back safe and sound, and I don't have to worry any more about leaving you all behind. Robin peered down at the younger girl with a furrowed brow. What did she mean by leaving them behind? Oh, I should remember to tell Luffy, Zoro, and Chopper that I'm not sick anymore so they don't have to worry. Sick? Robin questioned worriedly. Danny blinked up at her, before her mouth opened into an O shape and then she smiled sheepishly. Oops, she said, rubbing the back of her neck as she straightened in her seat. I forgot the rest of you all didn't know. Danny then continued, telling Robin about her illness, and then her subsequent finding of her ancestors' journals that described the curing of said illness. Robin stared at her for a while after the explanation before asking, and you're completely sure it worked? Danny nodded with a smile. Robin hummed in thought, but decided to trust the gunner's words. It explained quite a few things about her crewmate, as well as Luffy and Zoro's rather protective stance towards her. She was glad though. Even now, she could tell that the other woman was healthier looking and had more energy. It helped soothe the memories of a pale and gaunt face caked with dirt and blood, looking so panicked and pained, and oh god, they weren't running. Why weren't they running, please? She cut her train of thought abruptly, frowning minutely and glancing over at Danny. The woman was staring out the window with a content look on her face, humming Bink's sake under her breath. Robin felt something ease inside of her. Danny's continued cheerfulness and sheer happiness at being around the crew again was contagious, and Robin could feel a smile crawling its way onto her face. The slowing of the bus caught their attention, and Danny perked up and crowed excitedly. Frankie and Sunny are nearby. Oh, Robin hummed, smile widening as they left the bus and followed the path leading to the coral forest. Frankie perked up upon seeing two figures heading his direction, catching Den's attention when the shipwright held his arms open with a wide grin on his face. Danny, Robin, he called out cheerfully, easily catching the smaller woman when she leapt at him exuberantly, taking the planted kiss in stride and the subsequent purr. Den eyed the women carefully, eyes straying from the taller one to the other one now perched on Frankie's shoulder with a wary sort of fear. Frankie, Robin greeted back calmly, eyes crinkling as she smiled, watching Danny peck curiously at the cyborg's new mohawk. He endured the petting with good humor, glad that she was still the same if a bit more animal-like. What are you girls up to out here? Frankie asked curiously, more towards Robin than Danny, who was now poking at the new additions to his arms and thus utterly distracted. Robin laughed lightly and replied, I'm looking for something, so I'll be heading into the forest. Keep an eye on Danny, she said the last part in jest mostly, but Frankie nodded seriously. The gunner seemed to be the most unstable of the group after rejoining with the crew, and seeing as they had been separated so soon after being reunited again, all of them were worried about her. She was the most emotionally tied to the crew besides Luffy and felt everything so acutely it was a testament to her sheer willpower she hadn't crumbled under the strain. Robin smiled again and waved before making her way into the large forest, content with the fact that Frankie would keep the silent promise to watch out for Danny. "I'm okay, Frankie," Danny said matter-of-factly from her precarious perch on his shoulder, resting her head on her knees and grinning at him when he turned to look at her. He eyed her dubiously and asked seriously, "Are you sure?" Her eyes flashed gold briefly and she hummed, "Yeah, I'm sure. I can feel you all now so I don't have to worry about never finding you again." Frankie raised an eyebrow at the odd statement but didn't question it, content with the surety in her answer. Danny then turned her eyes over to Den, who was still watching her warily, and asked curiously, "Who's this?" The fishman fought of a shiver as her eyes pierced into him, eyeing him like a predator its prey, and it sent the hairs on the back of his neck rising. A deep instinctual urge to run away reared its head violently as her eyes flashed gold and she breathed in deeply, obviously tasting the air. Then the look and feeling vanished as she looked away and Frankie answered cheerily, seemingly unaware of the moment, "This is Den-chan. He's the one coding our Sunny." Cage Nami hadn't realized how much of a cage Danny had seemed to put herself in until they'd all reunited again. The older woman had seemed much lighter and free, like some heavy weight had been lifted off. Or perhaps broken free from a cage. She was suddenly showing her emotions and connecting better with the crew. She are uncaring towards the crew, but Nami had noticed the gunner was closed off and tended to hold the others at arm's length. Oh, Danny cared for them all and saw them as family, but there had always been a sort of emotional distance between them. Sort of like she felt like she wouldn't be with them for much longer. But now she was bridging the gap between them all, and because of it she was being excessively affectionate with them all now. Nami liked it though. She didn't feel like she was going to lose the gunner one day and never see her again. It was like now she was silently promising to always stay with them. But with that came the beast that lurked beneath the surface, now broken free from its cage. Nami couldn't bring herself to be afraid of it though. It was Danny, and Danny would never hurt one of the crew. They were nakama. Sanji stayed quiet as Danny draped herself over him with half-lidded eyes and a content look on her face. Jinbei was explaining Fishman Island's bloody past and the subsequent consequences of all the actions taken, and the gunner had made a beeline for the cook and promptly draped herself over him, inhaling deeply from time to time to take in his scent. The cook knew she was listening though by the fact that her eyes would occasionally flash gold when something Jinbei said caught her attention. He was uncomfortable at first when she had dropped on him, but the low rumbling noise she was making was quick to relax him and soothe frazzled nerves. He should have known that she would see his new edginess around women and seek to help him get over it. Danny was the most observant over the subtle reactions to the crew, so of course she would notice that his reactions to women were over-exaggerated to hide the nervous energy coiled inside tightly. The nosebleeds were half reaction to the female body and half stress induced from stopping himself flinching away from said female. Sanji was thankful for her new over-affectionate ways, as he found the nervous energy was slowly loosening. It would still be a while before he'd get over it completely, but he noticed that with Danny's touchy-feely actions, the rest of the crew were becoming much more receptive to affection from each other as well. Luffy had never been a very personal space-aware person, but instead of just invading the bubble, though he still did that, he was also bumping shoulders, draping himself over someone, or even patting someone's head. And that was just Luffy. Even Zoro had been doing subtle, unconscious movements of physical affection. But Sanji couldn't bring himself to mind, even when it was the men of the crew doing it. The moves helped soothe the blurred and panicked memories of everyone's faces twisted into fear and overwhelming terror or blood-caked skin and wild eyes' agonized screams and he cut his thoughts abruptly and focused back on the story and Danny's calming purrs. Everyone was okay now. They were all together and they wouldn't allow themselves to ever been separated so terribly ever again. Human Chopper knew Danny wasn't entirely human anymore. She was too much predator beast animal run, but she was still Danny. She was still the protector mother comforter, and if she had to change her very being to get stronger for Luffy, then he would fight every instinct that told him to run from her. So when the battle was on and there was blood and screams, when a loud howl of a wolf with the low guttural echo of a tiger sounded above all the noise, the only thing Chopper could think was good. Jinbei fought back a violent flinch at the echoing howl that rose above the clamoring noise of the battle. A deep instinct telling him to run away, run away, run away, but he shoved it away and locked in on the source of the disconcerting noise. It was the gunner of the Mugiwara crew. Her eyes were a glaring gold, hadn't they been brown before, though? And wide with the high of battle. Lips stretched in a feral grin that showed off her abnormal canines. She was tearing through her opponents with her 2 rifles, using one as a battering ram, while shooting strange bullets that had rather adverse effects when fired from the other, newer-looking one. Most of her opponents were cowering back and flinching away from her, looking more terrified of her than any of the other more destructive crewmates. It was a deep instinctual fear of a mighty predator that reflected in their eyes, and Jinbei was beginning to wonder how Luffy managed to wrangle this beast onto his crew, in a sense collaring a feral animal. Usopp was a scaredy cat. He wasn't afraid to admit that. Sometimes deep in his own mind he would admit he was afraid of his own crewmates occasionally. They were so monstrously strong and scary, so where did he fit in all of that? But then Sabaody happened and suddenly none of them were strong, and he could still hear Luffy's frantic and desperate screams to run, 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 could see Danny's blood-caked and pale face, dazed and agonized and looking like her world had just ended. And he never wanted to see that again. So he fought just as hard as the others in the battle, and instead of being frightened by the sudden howl that emanated from Danny's throat, he let it firm his resolve. Not even seeing the wide feral grin on the gunner's face, or the luminescent gold eyes, hungering for more blood, or even the graceful way she contorted her body as she fought using her guns, could frighten him. He was strong, he was a part of the crew for a reason. Brook had always been able to sense the beast lurking beneath the surface that was Danny Beckman, but hadn't paid it much mind. What did he care for the woman that could probably rip him apart easily, when he didn't really have a will to live much anymore? He was so lonely. Why? Why wash alive and they were all dead? Dead, 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 all dead, why? And then he was a part of the crew and he suddenly had to take notice of the caged animal. Could it end up being a threat to the crew? But Danny had shown she was fiercely protective of the crew and would fight tooth and nail for them even though her own body was failing her. Oh, he knew of her illness. Could see the all too familiar signs of the pale skin, coughing up blood, getting nauseous over certain plants. It had been the end to one of his dearest friends growing up and the reason he'd set sail for the sea. He never said anything, though. It wasn't his place. He decided to watch over her. The beast would follow her lead, and he was satisfied with that. Then they were all reunited again, and suddenly the beast was at the forefront and just as fiercely protective of the crew as Danny. And she wasn't sick anymore. If the exchange between the beast and the illness was what it took, Brook would take that over and over again so he would never have to watch a close friend die ever again. Flush Danny had a happy flush to her face, happy that her captain was safe once more and the fighting was done with no grievous wounds and alcohol was flowing. She hummed quietly to herself, before spotting Robin make her way out with the king trailing after at a short distance. Curiosity piqued, she followed the duo, casually slipping up next to Robin and listening with half an ear as they talked, breathing in deeply as she did. Her nose twitched when a disgusting smell reached her, and she narrowed her eyes, completely turning away from Robin and the king's conversation. With a single-minded determinedness she stalked over to the ledge of the balcony where the scent was coming from, frowning when she caught faint traces of malevolent emotions. Hopping up on the ledge she peered into the darkness, before catching the traces again and leaping after them without a second thought. She arrived at the source in time to see Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji be sent flying off in the distance with Nami screaming at them to get the treasure. Who? The gunner said, tone amused, shading her eyes with one hand as she watched the boys sailing away. What brought that on? She listened as Nami ranted about the treasure being stolen from the castle and the subsequent dead indeed and whether or not they could keep the treasure or not. Danny gave her an amused look and asked pointedly, and you let Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji go after it? You know that's just asking for something to happen to it, right? Nami's face paled as she gaped at the older girl in horror. Drops Zoro watched Danny as she snoozed against his thigh, having settled there after the ship had began making its trip back to the surface after saying their goodbyes and making their promise to the princess. He was glad to note that her sleeping wasn't because she was exhausted and had overworked her body but because she just wanted the comfort of being close to the first mate after so long. And he wouldn't have to worry about her overworking her body and losing more time to live anymore. She had finally gotten around to telling him, Luffy, and Chopper that she was no longer ill thanks to some sort of ritual her ancestors had written about or something. He was just thankful he didn't have wonder when the last straw to her life would break anymore. He wouldn't have to see drops of blood escaping her mouth for no apparent reason. The swordsman closed his eyes and hummed in contentment, slipping into a doze of his own. All was right with the crew now. They were together and better than ever and would never let that shameful separation happen ever again. Luffy fiddled with the ends of his gunner's braids, listening to rhythmic breathing from the woman's sleeping form. Random bursts of purring happened occasionally and the noise always eased something inside of the captain. He hadn't realized it until much later, but he knew that she had been there when Ace died. She had felt that soul-crushing pain, the darkness encroaching on his mind, the sheer agony of it all. He frowned silently, tracing the scars on her face lightly. They were there because of his own weakness. Danny shifted under the touch, eyes slowly blinking open. Luffy? She murmured sleepily, looking up at him in confusion. He let a wide grin split his face. She, rise and shine, Danny. It's time for a new adventure. But he was stronger now, they all were.